So, what do we want to accomplish today? First, we want to identify the most common local species for you to focus on. We have, there are some in that adjacent room, but there are more than that you really should eventually get familiar with and know their names. But even more important than their names is be able to tell a story about them, describe them, and observe them, and have a story to make it interesting. We also go through the, in the presentation, you hear more, you get another list of plants, and then we go on the wall outside. Here in the classroom, we want to give you an overview of a variety of concepts that you can talk about when you take people on a walk. You know, most people are interested in animals, but the nice part about plants is they're always there. Animals, they might not show up, you know, you can see the tracks and maybe where they live, but the plants are always there, and without the plants you wouldn't have animals. So there's always something to talk about, and you can feed in information about other subjects like various animals. And there is no way any of us can learn what there is to learn in a course or in 1.5 hours of presentation. So really for you to make this a valuable experience, you need some tools that you can use when you want to study more on your own, or when you go out on your own, or with a buddy that helps you learn. When you read books, reference, look things up on the website, on the internet. So we talk a little bit about tools. So here's a list of most common native plants.
Here, locally.
Local, okay. We'll talk about what native means later on. But the trees that you have here are the coast live oak, western sycamore, elderberry, and willow. You should be able to identify them. There are two represented on the table, which is the coast live oak and the elderberry. Shrubs, we have lots of shrubs. Broad sumac, sugarbush, coffeeberry, California sagebrush, mule fat, prickly pear cactus, poison oak, golden currant, white sage, black sage, California buckwheat, yerba santa, scale broom, and toyon. Now, can I see a show of hands who knows all the trees? Oh, pretty good. Can I see a show of hands who knows all of the shrubs? Okay, you must be a repeat auditing or something. Okay, I won't. You're not expected today to know them all, so that's why I'm not asking show of hands who knows none. It's totally okay. We'll get you through that.
Okay, so let me get this up. By the way, I had something I was going to say. I forgot what it was already. This, what is a plant? Oh, what I wanted to say was that we only have like an hour and a half here of this because we need to get outside and get on the trail and look at some of the plants out there. And so we're going to be hurrying along here pretty quickly through this material. But in between, of course, you have your customary snack there. I'd like to ask you to keep it as brief as possible, like maybe get your snacks and bring it along or something like that, because the more time we can spend outside, the better. And so if you'd help us out with that, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so what is a plant? Everybody knows what a plant is, right? Except it's different now than what it was when I was in school. So it's not just a trivial question. So it's something in the plant kingdom. When I was in school, there were only 2 kingdoms, plant and animal. Now there are 5 or 9, depending on which classification system you want to talk about. So these are some organisms that produce like seeds or spores, one of the major, most important criteria for a plant is the photosynthesis process. There are some others that do photosynthesis too, like the blue-green algae that are in a different kingdom now. They're not considered plants, but they have a photosynthesis process that is chemically different from this. But this is the photosynthesis that is that everybody should know about in general. You don't have to know about all the details of it, but you know, plants are generally green, and they have what in them that makes them green? Chlorophyll. Okay, so chlorophyll is a vital part of the photosynthesis process, and what they're doing is making food. It's the food that they use for their own internal growth and processes, and food that we as animals eat. So here's a general. Whoops, I'm sorry. The general formula for what goes in and what comes out of the process of the photosynthesis. There's a lot of really intricate things that go on in between that I don't understand. But the main thing is that it takes carbon dioxide, which is in the atmosphere. It takes water that it typically gets up through the roots of the plant, and it needs energy from the sun or other light source, ultimately from the sun, and it produces sugars and releases oxygen and water. So that's the main thing. It takes carbon dioxide and water, and it makes sugar. And that's the food that plants and animals all use. And so you don't need to remember the details of the number of oxygen and hydrogen atoms and things like that, but you do need to know carbon dioxide and water with the light makes sugars, oxygen, and water. Okay? As I said, the plants produce the food. They are the producers. Did you have an ecology lesson that talked about producers and consumers? Okay, so plants are the producers, and they produce all the food that's eaten by the animals. Except, as I said, like the blue-green algae in the ocean specifically produces a lot of the food that are eaten by the animals in the ocean. So without the plants, the animals couldn't live, and that's a really good concept when you have tours that you point that out, because I think that most people, well, I'm sure everybody learns it in school at one point. They tend to forget it, and they focus, as Gabi said, on the animals and forget about the plants. The relationship between the plants and the animals will interest your visitors, and so it's important to, excuse me. When you get one notification, you get 30, it sounded like. I'm sorry. So this is the point about releasing oxygen that we as animals need to breathe. So why the plant's important? This is some more material you could talk to people about here. There's some things they don't necessarily think about. They're a major part of the water cycle, you know, that you may study in your ecology lesson. But they stabilize the soil, and that's been really in the news a lot lately about the runoff after the fires, when there are no plants there to help to hold the soil, and they're important in providing shade for the animals. So they provide protection from the elements. I'm sorry about looking back over here. I feel like I'm standing in the corner if I go over here. So they provide resources that are important to man, as well as a lot of resources for the animals. And some of the things that you can talk about, you know, the wood that are used for building, and materials for fibers, for clothing and medicines. And I think most of those things you're familiar with, but they're good things to talk to people about when you're leading a tour. So let me give it back to God.
Okay, so when we see a plant, you want to be able to describe all different structures, and there are mainly 4 items that the plant has. The roots that are underground. Roots, by definition, are underground. They absorb the nutrients and the water, and it's really important to realize that that's the only place where they absorb nutrients and water. So for a plant to get hydrated, they need the water in the ground, not on top. Also very important, they anchor the plant. You know, when you get those winds and when a tree is not well anchored in the ground, it falls over and of course then dies. So the roots are very important. They keep the plant alive. Now the stems, they provide structural support. The stems are usually above ground. They transport the nutrients and the water that the roots have absorbed, and they transport it up to the leaves. And in the leaves, then, the photosynthesis occurs, or in the green parts of the plant, the photosynthesis occurs, and the sugar which is the food that is produced by the photosynthesis, part of it is used up there, but it's transported back down to the roots for storage. And that's how our plants survive fires and other detriments. You cut them off and they sprout again. Why are they able to do that? They don't have no leaves to create energy. Well, because they have the food stored underground. Then the leaves, that's where most of the photosynthesis occurs. And that's where they absorb sunlight. That's why you always see the canopy, the bigger leaf, and the outside, the look, you know, they grow in the direction of where they get light. They also release moisture and oxygen. And when you remember again the photosynthesis process, besides creating the sugar, they also create oxygen and water. And that is released in the leaves. On the underside of the leaves, they have openings, stoma, and they open up only in certain conditions. They're not open all the time. Usually when it's cooler, sometimes at night, and that's where they release the oxygen that helps us breathe, and moisture, and that's why it keeps us cool where there are plants, because they have some automatic air conditioning. And then the last part, I have it identified as flowers, but it really is, that would be for flowering plants. There are other plants that we can just categorize the whole, instead of just saying flowers, it's the organs of reproduction, like where they create seeds or seeds or other items that are used for reproduction, fruits that are used for reproduction. So the flowers have jobs, and they have very important jobs. We call it flower power. Without the flowers, there wouldn't be no reproduction. So, and for the reproduction to occur, the plants need some helpers. And it's the flowers that attract those helpers. So they attract the pollinators, that pollinate, which is a condition to reproduction. And how they do that? They can offer nectar, which is food for the pollinators. They attract them with either the color or scent, and so they do the marketing for them. And then once they are pollinated, then the flower can produce the fruit, which is, in a botanical sense, anything that contains the structure that contains the seed. Seed is the fruit. So when botanically we talk about fruit, it's not just an apple or a pear that we are used to buying in the supermarket and eat. But a fruit in botanical sense can be the hard shell, like of the buckeye, or the little siliques of the mustards, and so it encompasses all all of those different structures. So here are some examples how it looks on the Physalia minor, the white Canterbury bells. Have any of you seen them around here? No? I'm sure you have them here.
Oh, I'm sure we do. I've seen them, but I didn't want to answer.
but thank you.
But I did.
So you know you can find them there.
Somewhere outside the door.
So this is, yeah, they look huge, you know. So we have here sepals. Well, I should start with the pedicel. The pedicel is what holds the flower up. It's like the stem of the flower. Then we have sepals, these tiny little things, and then we have these showy big things that are called petals. And then all of those are not mandatory. What is mandatory are the sexual organs, what we call them, which is stamens and pistil. So the stamens are these things with a little round white ball. Those are the male parts. The stamens have the filament is that little line, and the anthers is this little ball on top, and the anthers contain the pollen. And then here in the middle, this white fork thing is the top of the pistil. So a pistil is the female organ, and it is one structure that consists of ovary, style, and stigma. So the ovary is always on the base, and then the style is just like a line, like a miniature cylinder, and the stigma is on top of the style that receives the pollen. And if you need a mnemonic device in trying to remember which one is the style and which one is the stigma, I always think of the stigma as sticky because it needs to hold the pollen. So here is a diagram. You could, this is from the side, the pedicel, which is the stem. The receptacle, I didn't talk about that before, but the receptacle holds together the sepals and the petals. The stamens are sticking out here, and here's the pistil. Now when you look at the flower from the top, it might look like this. You have the sepals here, the petals here, and the stamen, and then the pistil. So each flowers look very different. Each flower looks very different, but they all, the different flower parts are arranged in the same order. So the sepals are on the outside, and then the petals, and then the male flower parts, and in the middle it's always the female, the pistil. We do have names, and those names and terms are important for as a tool for further learning, because you need to be able to describe what you see, and you need to be able to understand what you read. So it's good to be familiar with these terms. The calyx is something that you do hear a lot, because often these sepals are fused together and have a particular structure. So when you talk about the sepals together, then you call it the calyx. Sometimes the sepal and the petals are together and it's a perianth, but this one is not as common a term used, but the calyx definitely. Now this is the same flower that is looked at from the side here, except we pulled off some petals so you could see the inside. So we have the pedicel again, the receptacle where the other flower parts are attached to. Then you have the sepal in the outside, then comes the petal, then comes the stamen, and they surround the pistil. Now here's the pistil a little better explained. We have the ovary here in the bottom, then this is the style, and over here is the stigma. Now inside the ovary, you have the ovules and the placenta, which is the middle part, and then the ovules are the part in the outside surrounding the placenta, and those are the parts that are supposed to develop into the seeds. And we borrowed this diagram from Bob Munz, who has done a fantastic job in diagramming and documenting lots of trails and flowers. Yes?
Something I've never understood. In order for pollination to be successful, does the pollen have to go to a plant on another instance of the same plant, or can it go to just another flower on
the same plant?
The same plant?
Both. It depends on the species. The plants usually have some kind of system to avoid pollination even from the same plant, from the same flower, but also from the same plant. And they do that by ripening at different point of view. So the pollen might disperse a little earlier than the stigma opens up to receive the pollen. And
question there?
yes.
Yeah. Forgive me, I'm on a different time zone. If we didn't have colonization at all, I can understand in China the bees would have to go to manual. What actually then would this happen to the plant? Does it die? The species die out?
It depends on the plant. There are some plants or many plants do kind of reproduce other than through pollination. They could clone each other. And you have big areas with the same genetic material. They clone each other. So they don't necessarily die, but it depends on the plant.
Right.
Yeah. So yes, it is. If you don't have pollinators, there would be a large percentage of plants that would eventually die out. They live for a while, but one more thing about, well, we do go later on, we have something on pollination, but in this diagram, it's really easy to see the pollen, gets stuck here on the stigma, but to get fertilized, the pollen needs to work itself through the style to get down here to the ovary, the ovules. And that process can take a long time, like in the oak, it could take several months. So just because a plant is pollinated in that moment, it's not necessarily fertilized. But pollination is a requirement to get fertilized.
I'm sorry, before you go on,
Yes.
in terms of the extinction of plants, I just hiked with the president of CPS, California National Plant
Dan
Society.
Blusenkamp?
Down at Anson. And he just did a video on plant extinction.
From the Native Plant Society, we have a chapter in the Sindigo Mountains chapter. And I think this area is part of our chapter.
Well, right here, you really could have a choice. You could go to the LA Santa Monica Mountains chapter events, or to the ours, which our meetings are in Pasadena. Or you could go to both of them if you want. There's no we're not proprietary about who goes where.
Hobby, wherever. Yeah. But it's a very good organization to learn more about plants. Thank you for that comment.
And I think if we could, Ron?
Yeah?
If we could get the link that he had about Dan Blusenkamp's presentation about extinction, it would be good to
I'll
post
send it
it
to you, Ron.
Yeah, and
Post
Ricky,
where
why don't
the,
you send it to me?
I'll send it.
for the class to be able to look
Sure.
at it. Okay, I have a little bit about classification here, and that's a pretty dull topic for a lot of people. But it's important, especially when you're trying to learn more about the plants. And it's the scientific name for classification of things is called taxonomy. And that's the typically hierarchical structure of that you learned in high school biology or something. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. An example are the kingdom is flowering plants. The phylum is kingdom is plants. Phylum is flowering plants, and on down. Well, we in our field guides in our study here normally we look at the plant name, which includes the genus and the species and the family. Most of what we do are using those three lower groups in the taxonomy. Many of the field guides are organized by family. Some are organized by color, things like that, but flower color. But many of them are organized by family. So it helps to be able to understand what the genus and species names are, but also what family things are in. We have a mnemonic to remember the sequence of that. There are lots of mnemonics that are out there. This one's King Philip came over for great soup. Doesn't matter. That doesn't have to make sense. Just if you can remember. By the way, minor thing where they talk about phylum for animals and plants. They talk about division. Say King David instead of King Philip. A little bit more about names. So we don't use the botanical names with our visitors to the park. They will typically just get confused by it and they won't remember them. They'd be lucky to remember the common names, but that's a lot easier for people to get their head around. But if you're going to do any work on your own, trying to identify things or study more about them, that it's important for you to be able to work with the botanical names. Now, the botanical name is always the genus and the species. The genus is a group of multiple species that are all closely related into one group. So oaks the genus name is Quercus. So all the oaks have the genus name of Quercus, and then the second name, Agrifolia, is the specific epithet they call it. So the plant name is actually the whole genus and species name together, Quercus agrifolia, Quercus live oak. So, but some things about common names that can be confusing. One is that common names can be misleading. For instance, sagebrush and black sage both have sage in it. Sounds like they should be related, but they're not related. They're in totally different families. One's in the mint family and one's in the sunflower family. They have the same sage in the name because they smell similar. You know, so that's really misleading about the relationship. Poison oak and coast live oak, again, they have oak in them, but they're not at all related, even though the name might suggest that. But you can get some relationship information here, like mugwort and sagebrush, very different names, common names, but they both have Artemisia as the genus name, so that tells you that these are closely related species. And that's the relationship. The taxonomy is usually based on characteristics like internal structure of the flowers, things like that. And so you would expect that the mugwort and the sagebrush, if you dissected a flower, you would find that they're very, very similar. Now we're getting a lot of DNA analysis to help refine the taxonomy of plants and animals. And some things that looked like they were probably kind of closely related, you weren't sure they were thrown into the same family in the past. Now we're using the DNA, finding they're not as closely related as we thought they might have been, and so we put them into different taxonomic structures. When I say we, I mean botanists in general, not me. And the other thing about common names is that if you go to a different place, you might find the same plant referred to by a different name, or you might find other plants with the same name but that are really unrelated, like snake root. Well, that's going to be this carrot family thing that, or is native around here, or is it that sunflower plant that is an invasive in their kingdom, or box elder and ash maple are just two different names for Acer negundo. So, well, when I came out here, I grew up in the East and Midwest, and I knew the sweet gum trees. And I came out here, and they're everywhere out here, the sweet gum trees. And I talked to people about them, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Because everybody around here calls them liquid amber. And so that's where, if we looked at the book, we'd see that they were both the same botanical name, but different common names. But now, it's confusing now a little bit, a lot. So a lot of botanists, because with all this DNA analysis, a lot of the common names a lot of the botanical names are changing too. As they find different relationships, they have to move plants around into different places in the taxonomy, so some of the names have to change there too. So anyway, let's talk about native plants.
Okay. It's the big rage right now to plant native plants. And a lot of people refer to California native plants. So let's see, what does that really mean, a native plant? Plants that have evolved in the local area or that arrived in the area without human intervention. That is a native plant. And you can see it says in the local area. So whenever you say native, you have to identify the area. So you could talk about California native, which encompasses a lot of different areas, a large geographic area with different plant communities and different climates. So it's kind of dangerous to say, yeah, I want only California natives in my garden, but then you put something there from the Sierras that isn't going to do well in our Mediterranean climate because it's a different climate. So you can also say it's native to the northern hemisphere. There are some plants that are all over the northern hemisphere, and they are native to the United States, Canada, and Europe. So whenever you say native, make sure you understand what locality you are talking about. Then you might have heard the term endemic. Endemic plants are native to a well-defined geographic area and restricted to this area. So that becomes much more specific. Usually when we say endemic, we are talking about a smaller geographic area. It could be the Singapore Mountains. It could be even smaller than that, a particular canyon. And they're only in that area and not in other areas. We could have plants, for example, in, we say, we have native plants that are native to the Singapore Mountains, or even native to California, but they are also native to Arizona and New Mexico. So that would not be endemic. But if you say this is an endemic plant to California, even though it's a larger area, it just means that it doesn't grow outside of California, or it's not native to outside of California. So what are introduced plants? Plants that are not native to the area. So everything else. Plants that didn't evolve here, or that came intentionally or unintentionally, but through human intervention. So naturalized plants are introduced plants that now grow without human intervention in the wild, without any help. They found the same environment or climate like the Mediterranean plants from Europe, from the Mediterranean area, or South Africa that also has a Mediterranean climate. They have the same climate, but they evolved there. When you bring them over here to our Mediterranean climate, then they do really, really well, because they have everything they need to grow, but they don't have the limiting factors to keep them in check, to keep them in control. Which the limiting factors are the animals and the bacteria and the, when I talk about animals, I don't talk just about big mammals, but tiny insects and reptiles and anything that makes use of the plant. Now, the next step is the invasive plants. So they are introduced, they are naturalized, they grow without help, and they become invasive because, well, here it's termed to behave badly, but they basically, what does that mean? Plants don't normally behave badly. They have a negative impact on their, so what does behaving badly mean? They have a negative impact on the native vegetation. They're invasive because they outcompete the native plant, and I just mentioned that. Why? Because they have fewer natural limits of growth, like the insects, browsing animals, or natural diseases. And since they have fewer limits, they use the resources, water, soil, and sunlight at a faster rate than native plants. So they grow faster and more successfully and take the resources from the native plants. And they often don't provide food and shelter to the local animals. I don't know, are you familiar with Arundo?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever seen a bird nest in Arundo?
No.
Or even bugs in the Arundo. There's bugs are not there, the birds are not there either.
Another great example of an invasive species, which we don't have here, which they have in the southeast, is kudzu,
Yeah. Right.
the plant that ate the south.
Right.
There was one here and one here.
What, an invasive plant, wouldn't it originally be a native somewhere? And would it be then beneficial to its environment?
Yes, that's right.
That's totally true. The introduced plant is not a bad plant. It's just in the wrong location. So where it is native to, it's very desired, but it's in a wrong location where it has a negative impact on the native.
Just to mention that Arundo does provide some sort of shelter to animals, and for example, tomorrow I'm going to be working on an Arundo removal. They must have a biologist there to inspect the Arundo to make sure the area that they're clearing doesn't have anything, any species in it that they would harm. So there are things in the Arundo. If anybody wants to help out Arundo removal tomorrow morning, let me know. Talk to you at break.
It's a great thing that they check for that, but the species that you might find are there despite the Arundo,
That's
not
right.
because of the Arundo.
That's right.
Last point. As I pointed out in our nature hawk, the mistletoe growing in the sycamores is an invasive plant. But they all get along, symbiotic relationship. No, it doesn't kill the sycamore.
Okay, the mistletoe is native. It doesn't fall under,
Invasive?
no, it's not invasive. It's
You may have a negative impact on the tree, but it's not invasive in this.
It has developed here.
Very much.
And they both have survived here for thousands of years, or maybe millions of years, and so, it's not been overall a problem. Maybe a problem for an individual tree, but not for the environment overall.
Yeah. And there are other parasitic plants, and I'm really glad that you brought that up because it's a common misconception
Parasitic.
Well, not only mistletoe, like we see the dodder, that orange stuff that grows over,
Which looks like melted cheese.
which the majority, what you see is native. There's only a certain kind that's beginning to come in, but it's not bright orange. So if you see the bright orange dodder, that is native, and yes, it's parasitic. It impacts the host plant, but it usually doesn't kill it because it needs it to survive. So the wild cucumber, some people tear it off because it covers the plant and it says it's going to choke it to death. No, it's native. It doesn't have a negative impact, or at least not a permanent negative impact, because it's deciduous. It just grows in spring, then it loses its leaves, and it gives the shrub that's underneath enough time to grow and get sunlight. And so they evolve together, they survive together, they're doing okay. Let's not, disturb them. Okay, I think we got that one. How do plants spread? I'll do this quickly. It came up earlier. There's seed dispersal. And how does seed dispersal work? Wind, very important, wind. Gravity, the fruit just falls to the ground. Water, once it's in the ground, the water might transport it. Animals, they eat it and then spread it with their droppings. And people, or they carry it in their fur or in their boots, the two-legged animals. And people, truck tires, that's how the seed gets dispersed. And the other is cloning that we spoke of. They have rhizomes and pups. Rhizomes are roots that are barely in the ground. They have maybe an inch of dirt about them, but they go horizontally out. Pups, if you're familiar with bulb plants, they have these round bulbs, and then the pups are little bulbs that appear around them. And you have some plants that do both, like the chaparral yucca. We have seeds, those little watermelon-sized seeds. And
watermelon seed size, not.
Yeah. Thank you. I knew it came out wrong. And but they also have pups. So and cuttings. If you're a gardener, you take the cutting and put it in the ground, and it's cloning. But cuttings is by people. But in the wild, there is a lot of cloning going on.
Okay. So now this is really my favorite topic. I grew up in the Midwest and the East, and adaptations to the environment were not nearly as visible and easy to understand as they are here. In Southern California, there are great adaptations that the plants have made over evolutionary time to survive here. And I'm going to mostly show you when we get outside in the field, but here are just some things. Have you heard about the Mediterranean climate? Okay, so you know that in the Mediterranean climate that we have here in most of California, short, kind of damp, not very wet, but damp winters, and long, hot, dry summers. So that long, hot, dry summer is a real problem for plants to survive. And so there are lots of different ways that they've discovered evolutionarily to survive it. So there are some that are white in color or have white on the undersides of the leaves, and that can help reflect the light, and so that the leaves don't get as warm. Mugwort is really that one. That's a mugwort. So, but it's white on the undersides, and on a hot day, in the morning, the leaves will be like this, and in the afternoon, on a hot summer day, the leaves will have turned so the white sides are facing up. Or the upper ones may go in like that so that they look whiter. They don't get as warm, they don't lose as much moisture through the leaf. Another one is a lot of plants have tiny leaves in lots of different ways, but having small leaves is a very common adaptation in Southern California to not losing too much water. Some of them have fuzz on the back of the leaves. As Gabi said, the pores, the stoma that lose where the water evaporates are often on the underside of the leaf. And so if they have a hairy underside, the air right next to the leaf is pretty still. Even when there's a breeze blowing elsewhere, right next to the leaf, the air is not moving as much, and so it doesn't evaporate as readily as on others. And then there are lots of plants, and especially in the chaparral, which have waxy, shiny leaves, and often curled leaves of some kind. And what that does is that the waxiness, we learned that it seals the water in. It's not sealing water in, but it's making the leaves highly reflective, and so they reflect a lot of the light back rather than absorbing them into the leaf, and that keeps the leaves cooler. And also, like on these leaves right here, you see they're curled, and so only a small part of the leaf is shining directly at right angles to the sunlight, and so again, it doesn't warm up as much, and doesn't get us so warm. It doesn't lose as much oxygen. We'll see several examples of that when we get out in the field. So that's a real quick thing, and we'll look at that outside. And then the other thing that's really big in adaptations here in Southern California is, we know we have lots of fires. You have more fires than any place I know. But since there are relatively frequent fires, plants have found ways to survive that. And so that, two major ways is that some of them have buds in the root crown that are dormant and don't grow because there's chemicals, hormones in the upper part that inhibit growth of those buds. But if fire comes in and burns off the top of the plant, then those hormones are not there anymore, and those buds are free to begin to grow. And you see that in fire recovery all the time, around many of the shrubs. You see the new growth coming up from the base of the skeletal plant. And another way, a very common way in the chaparral is, or sage scrub communities, are to have seeds that fall to the ground and get kind of mixed in the dust. And these are seeds that do not germinate until the fire comes. They need specific things in the fire. It could be chemicals in the ash, or it could be the heat of the fire that will cause the seed coat to be broken, and so that when the rains come, that seed can germinate and grow. But if there's no fire, then they will sit there for decades and waiting for the next fire.
What would be an example of that?
Lodgepole pine.
Yeah, and
Poodle dog bush.
Poodle dog bush is a good one. After the station fire, which burned so much up in the San Gabriel Mountains, we had whole hillsides just covered with poodle dog bush. And we got emails saying, what is this plant that we've never seen before? And that's a good example. There are lots of them. After the station fire, if you just drove the roads, you couldn't hike there, but you drive the roads, and there were hills covered with flowers that people hadn't seen for decades. By the millions. It's amazing. So if you get a chance to go into an area in the spring, after a fire occurred in the summer or fall, watch for those flowers. It's amazing.
Does crown there refer to the...
In this case, we're talking about the root crown, the top where the roots meet the stem. Not crown as in a forest. Ground forest, yes. These are two major ways, and manzanitas and ceanothus are two shrubs that do this a lot, and they do some of both. Some manzanitas crown sprout, some manzanitas have dormant seeds. So we'll be able to see some of that, get into some of the burn areas here.
I'm sorry. So are you saying manzanitas benefit from a fire or grow after?
Well, I look at it not so much as benefiting from the fires as having fire insurance.
Oh, okay.
Now, you can get fire insurance on your house, but you don't say the house benefits, but it's a protection in case the house does burn.
Yeah.
So this is a way for the species there to survive in that place if there is a fire, and we know that there is a lot of that in chaparral. Other adaptations here are in Southern California that are pretty evident are things that adaptations to disturbance, especially along waterways and in the alluvial scrub areas where the streams, occasional rain will shift everything around, and the plants have to be able to survive with a lot of shifting soil and things like that. Pollination is one that, having mentioned wind pollination, many trees and all of our grasses are wind pollinated. They don't have the big showy flowers. They don't have the, any petals. Typically, if they don't need animals to pollinate them, they will not have the things that attract insects. So they don't have petals. They just have the sexual parts. And so you see these catkins of an oak tree. These are all individual flowers on here. They're not showing, but they will. These are the male flowers. They release the pollen into the air, hoping that some of that pollen will just happen to land randomly on a receptive female flower. And on oak trees, the female flowers are so inconspicuous that they're hard to find. We all know that bees and wasps and things will pollinate flowers, but many of our plants are pollinated by beetles. And that's where the petals are very helpful. And some places the hummingbirds and bats can pollinate it as well. So we need to move quickly, so let's. Okay, not quite do this. Okay. Sometimes we do things back and we forget where we're going to switch.
I do this very quickly. The gardeners know all that. Soil, which has the nutrients. Water, which is vital for photosynthesis. Sunlight. And overall conditions for successful germination, which varies from plant to plant, and these other three, soil, water, and sunlight, also varies from plant to plant, how much each or what kind of nutrients and when the water is coming and how much sunlight they need. So it varies greatly, but they all need some of that. And then, of course, for the plants to thrive is to first be able to germinate, and for that, many plants need a period of rest, or I should say many seeds need a period of rest, and for the fire-adapted plants, some environmental conditions, heat, smoke, exposure. Exposure meaning when everything has burned off, there is more light available, and so there's more exposure, and some plants just do better with that, like all the bulb plants, most of the bulb plants that we have here. Now this is important plant communities. When we talk about plants, plants don't live by themselves. They live in a community, just like we do. They benefit from each other, and they together provide certain habitats. So often when you try to identify a plant, it's good to notice the surrounding plants too, where they live. So a collection of plants that share the same environmental condition, that is basically a plant community. And we have here 5. The chaparral is this dark, fully covered hillside. Southern oak woodland, it's very hard to see, it looks black in here. Coastal sage scrub is all of this, and a subdivision of the coastal sage scrub is alluvial scrub right in the dry creek bed. Then we have riparian woodland, and we are going to go through all of them, but just for your area, this picture is taken from Eaton Canyon, and those are the plant communities from Eaton Canyon. But there is a question, which is the most common plant communities here locally. What would you say? Chaparral, oak woodland, and what else? And riparian. Now, I please be aware that the riparian woodland means there is water year-round. If it's not year-round, it's not riparian. Okay? If you have, you might have alluvial scrub and coastal sage scrub in those creeks that are have water only in winter.
A riparian area could have underground water. It may not be necessarily on the surface, but it has to be there and available to the trees.
Okay, coastal sage scrub. Rocky washes and hot, dry slopes. Let me go back. See this, this area up here? It's on the hills, but it's not all green. It's like dotted with plants. That's coastal sage scrub too, not only down here. So coastal sage scrub is in rocky washes and in hot, dry slopes. It's dominated by medium-sized shrubs with small leaves, white or hairy leaves, and aromatic leaves. Either all of those or some of those characteristic of the leaves apply, not, on the shrubs. Not each plant has all of these leaves. And a lot of times these plants are drought deciduous, which means in the drought, the way to cope with the drought is just to shut down. They lose their leaves, and you see some plants that you might think are dead or dying, but they're just sleeping. So the indicator plants of the coastal sage scrub is California sagebrush, white sage, black sage. Those are all smaller shrubs, medium shrub. Now occasional, you see a big shrub in the coastal sage scrub. and that would be the laurel sumac. And the flat-top buckwheat, again, is a short scrub. So through the coastal sage scrub, you can usually walk in between the plants. You can usually look over the plants because they're shorter than you. Of course, like with everything, there are variations. The yucca is well represented. It's not on there because yucca grows in many other areas too, but that's the coastal sage scrub. I don't think you have.
I think this area back behind the nature center
Yeah.
would be considered coastal sage scrub.
Yeah, that's been identified as coastal sage.
Okay. Chaparral. Chaparral occurs above the coastal sage scrub. There's still dry slopes, but they are less dry than in the coastal sage scrub because they're higher up, so they get more rain and it's cooler. They're dominated, so the chaparral gets more water than the coastal sage scrub, or needs more water. They are dominated by large, taller than you, evergreen shrubs with hard, waxy leaf. It's very hard to walk through the chaparral. They're sturdy. You can't just bend a little branch. And there are different types of chaparral. There are mixed chaparral, where all of these plants occur, and sometimes there are chaparral that's dominated by a particular plant, like lilac or manzanita. It depends where you go. We have chaparral all over California, and there are different types of chaparral, but they are all large evergreen shrubs with hard, waxy leaf, and the difference is in the composition of the shrubs. The Zingiber Mountains mainly has mixed chaparral, where these plants occur. The chamise, toyon, and scrub oak I saw on the table. Manzanita, ceanothus is another word for lilac, California lilac, and North mahogany. So here's an example of chaparral on the north-facing slope and coastal sage scrub on the south-facing slope. Here's the north-facing slope. It's thick. And here's the south-facing slope. There are some larger ones, but they're pretty much low-growing areas in between where you can more easily walk. This picture was taken several years after a fire, so the chaparral has not fully recovered. That's why there are still these areas that you can see through. The immature chaparral, you can't see the ground. On the coastal sage scrub, even mature coastal sage scrub, you will always see some ground. Southern oak woodland. Southern oak woodland is dominated by coast live oak. That's pretty easy. There's more to it though, because they have a nice understory. And the understory, takes advantage of the shade and the mulch that the evergreen oak generate. So the main big trees, the coast live oak, and underneath we find poison oak, golden kern, mugwort, and many others, but these are the main ones. If you know these, you're good. And here's the riparian. So again, riparian is year-round water. On the edges, on an ecotone, where one plant community goes into another plant community, you might find some riparian woodland plants that are growing even though for part of the year the water disappears, but it's only in those ecotones. It's adapted to occasional flooding, but it's not adapted to occasional drought. It usually needs water. Examples are willows and cottonwoods are very definitely they need water. Now they do have pretty deep roots, so if you have an occasional drought, you could still, and that's why the water disappears. You could still find them where there is no water. But if you see a willow or cottonwood, you know for sure that usually that water is flowing year-round, and it's only because we have an extreme drought that there's no water. They don't die immediately with one drought here, you know. So it's a good indicator. The western sycamore is a terrific tree that is not only along the riparian woodland, but it's also in the coastal sage scrub, or I should say alluvial scrub. The western sycamore has very deep roots, and
excuse me, is the western sycamore the same as the California sycamore? Or
I haven't heard the term California sycamore, but there are there's the eastern sycamore, and there's the London plane tree that is planted.
I haven't
Have you
heard California sycamore by
I
that
thought
name.
I found it in the Sunset.
Magazine. Just
the
look
book.
up the botanical name, and then you can check it out if it's the same or not. And mule fat, I would say that the western sycamore and the mule fat, they occur in the riparian woodland, but they are not indicator plants of the riparian woodland. The willows and the cottonwoods are. Because we find the western sycamore in alluvial scrub and the same as the mule fat.
Well, the other major tree with year-round water are alders.
Why are the alders not there?
I don't know. We ask that question every year, I think.
And then we don't correct it. So, yeah, we should take the mule fat out because that's really confusing. The mule fat grows very well in the dry creek bed, you know, over.
It's 10:30. We should finish up.
Alluvial scrub.
Why don't we skip that? We really don't have much of that here. But a lot of.
Okay, this is. Give me 2 minutes, okay? These are all different leaves, and for you to learn the tools of learning, this goes into the tools of learning, you should be able to describe these leaves, not only the shape but also the way they attach to the stem and how they smell, how they feel, like to observe. And how the margins, the edges are. So you have this in your handout, and you can study it from there.
And there are more extensive diagrams like this with more terminology in the Windows into the Wild books that you have.
Okay, so since we are short of time, I'm kind of skipping that. We often ask, is the leaf opposite or alternate? Like, do they attach on the stem on the same place, or like here, or in different alternate places? World, that is often the most important. Here, sessile, they don't have a little stem. And then the other one is the leaf, palmate or compound.
Does the attachment of the leaf to the stem have a purpose, or is it just for identification?
Well, it has the purpose of being attached to the stem.
Otherwise, but they're all attached to the stem. So,
right.
Is the configuration?
It's only it helps in identification.
Okay.
But the main identification, I'm really glad you asked this, because the main identification, especially when you talk about family and genus, which are the larger categories, is the flower, the reproductive structure. So there is where you want to know. And here the observation that I want to point out really quick is what you need to do. You need to not only look at the flowers, you need to turn it around. If it's the flower or the leaf, okay? If you look at this like that, you don't see that how the underside is, how the veins go. If you look at this flower right here, the sun cup, if you don't turn it around, you have no idea what's happening back here. The sepals, how the sepals are. And they are an identifying characteristic. The Indian pink, I've looked at that while I was learning the plants. It was only in the second year or so that I realized, oh, it had this big tubular structure behind it. Because I always saw it like that on the trail. So no idea that this was a plant that had all this long tube behind it. And this is the last one, and I think I'm just going to point out 3 things, and we do the rest in the field, if we have a chance. What do these flowers have in common?
All of them.
Lots of them.
Yeah, right.
Oh, pretty. They're pretty.
Well, these are all in the same family. Can you know what family that is?
Sunflower?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sunflower?
Even those funny ones over in the corner.
So this is a nobody's arguing with us on this one, right? That's a sunflower. It has ray flowers, and it has in the middle disc flowers. But then there are also sunflowers that don't have both ray flowers and disc flowers. Like these only have ray flowers, these only have disc flowers. This has just a few ray flowers and disc flowers. And this one has a lot of disc flowers where the outer disc flowers are extra big. but they are all sunflowers. Sunflower is a family. It's one of the largest families besides the orchid family in the world. So you find many, many, many sunflowers. And the neat part about knowing about sunflowers is, since they are so prevalent, and you run into one, and you don't know what flower it is, but you can identify the sunflower, then you say it's a sunflower. You might not say which specific sunflower it is, but it's a sunflower. So, and that's the neat part about beginning to identify the flowers. You might not have the specific species, but if you know the family or you know the genus even, like oak, you know, you don't know which kind of oak it is, but it's an oak because it has an acorn. You conveyed already an important one. So here's what I just said. And, well, look that one up. We are late, it's right?
Yeah.
It's 10:30?
It's 10:35 now. I don't want to deprive you of your snack, but I want to get out in the field as quickly as we can, because there's a lot to do out there.